They told us the royal bond was a myth. They said the mark of the Alpha King only appears on the skin of the strongest, most elite she-wolves in the world. So explain this. Why was a starving, shivering Omega named Seraphina found in a blizzard clutching a baby she didn't give birth to? And why the moment that child grabbed her wrist, did the ancient burning crest of the royal family sear itself into her flesh? The king wanted her executed for kidnapping. The kingdom wanted her exiled. But the baby would scream if anyone else touched him. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the scandal that almost destroyed the Blackwood dynasty. The winter in Aspen Ridge wasn't just cold, it was predatory. The wind didn't just blow, it hunted, seeking out any gap in your coat, any tear in your boots. For Seraphina, an Omega working the graveyard shift at the Silver Pines ski resort, the cold was a constant companion. She wasn't a guest at the resort. She was the invisible labor, the one who hauled the trash bags from the five-star kitchens to the compactor behind the tree line. She was 22, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her wolf was weak, barely a whisper in her mind, suppressed by years of malnutrition and the heavy metallic collars Omegas were forced to wear when working in high-security zones. "Hurry up, Sarah," the shift manager, a beta named Rickard, barked over the radio. "The VIP guests are arriving in 20 minutes. I don't want them seeing trash." "I'm moving, Rickard," Sarah whispered, her breath puffing out in white clouds. She dragged the heavy black bag through the snow. It was a blizzard tonight. Visibility was near zero. The floodlights of the resort were just hazy yellow blurs behind her. She reached the compactor, heaved the bag inside, and pressed the button. The machine groaned, crushing the remnants of lobster dinners and expensive champagne bottles. That's when she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was distinct. A thin, reedy wail. Sarah froze. Her wolf ears twitched, straining against the howling gale. Wah! Wah! It was coming from the tree line, the forbidden zone. Beyond that fence lay the private territory of the Blackwood Royal Pack, the ruling family of the entire North American shifting coalition. Entering that woods was an automatic death sentence for a stray Omega. But the sound came again, weaker this time. A choking sob. Sarah looked at the camera mounted on the back door. It was sweeping left. She had 10 seconds. "Don't do it, Sarah," she told herself. "It's a trap, or a dying animal." But her feet moved on their own. She scrambled over the chain-link fence, the metal biting into her frozen palms, and dropped into the deep powder on the other side. She waded through waist-deep snow following the sound. She found it nestled in the hollow of a massive oak tree. A wicker basket. It was covered in snow, almost invisible. Inside, wrapped in a blanket of blue cashmere that cost more than Sarah's entire life's earnings, was a baby. He was blue. His lips were turning purple. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just gasping, his tiny chest barely moving. "Oh God," Sarah gasped. She ripped off her own coat, a ragged second-hand parka, and scooped the bundle up. Hey, stay with me, little one." She fell to her knees in the snow, ripping open her flannel shirt to press the freezing infant against her bare skin, trying to share her meager body heat. She didn't care about the cold biting her own skin. She rubbed the baby's back, blowing warm air onto his face. "Come on," she begged. "Come on." The baby let out a shuddering gasp. His eyes fluttered open. They were the color of storm clouds, startlingly gray. Then he moved. His tiny freezing hand reached out and clamped onto Sarah's left wrist. The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't warmth. It was an explosion. Sarah screamed, falling back into the snow. It felt like someone had pressed a branding iron directly onto the tender skin of her inner wrist. The pain was blinding white-hot and nauseating. She smelled burning flesh. The baby didn't let go. If anything, he held on tighter. A golden light erupted from where their skin touched. It was so bright it illuminated the dark forest, casting long, terrifying shadows against the trees. The light swirled, liquid and alive, sinking into Sarah's pores. She writhed in the snow, biting her tongue to keep from passing out. The pain traveled up her arm, slamming into her heart, forcing her heart to beat in a rhythm that wasn't her own. Thump, 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 thump. Strong, dominant, regal. As the light faded, the baby began to cry again. But this time it was a loud, healthy scream of life. Sarah lay panting, sweat freezing on her forehead. She looked down at her wrist. There, etched in raised, angry red welts that were slowly turning a deep, shimmering gold, was a mark. It wasn't a pack tattoo. It wasn't a mating bite. It was a crest. A wolf head howling at a crescent moon entwined with thorns. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that crest. Every wolf in the continent knew that crest. It was the personal seal of Calen Blackwood, the Alpha King. "Freeze!" The shout came from everywhere at once. Floodlights blinded her. The sound of safeties clicking off on assault rifles filled the air. "Drop the child hands behind your head, on your stomach now." Sarah squinted against the light. 6 men in tactical gear wearing the Royal Guard insignia had her surrounded. I found him," Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. "He was freezing." "I said drop the asset," the lead guard roared. He was a massive alpha, his eyes glowing red. "He's holding me," Sarah cried out, lifting her arm to show them. "I can't." The lead guard stepped forward, grabbing the baby roughly to pull him away. The moment the guard's skin touched the baby, the infant let out a blood-curdling shriek of distress. Simultaneously, a shockwave of energy blasted from Sarah's body. It threw the 250-pound guard backward into a tree with a sickening crunch. Silence fell over the clearing. The other guards stared, not at the baby, but at Sarah's wrist where the golden mark was now pulsing with a terrifying rhythmic light. "Commander," one of the guards whispered into his comms, his voice shaking. "We have a code red. You need to get the king. We found the missing heir. But, sir, you're not going to believe who has him." The holding cell in the basement of the Blackwood estate was cleaner than Sarah's apartment, but it was infinitely colder. The walls were reinforced, silver-infused concrete, dampening any wolf abilities. Sarah sat on the metal cot, shivering. They had taken her coat. She was in her thin work uniform. But her left wrist felt like it was on fire. The baby, the heir, had been taken from her the moment they sedated her in the woods. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest, a phantom limb sensation, as if a piece of her soul was missing. The heavy steel door hissed open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, but it wasn't the weather. It was the presence of the man who walked in. Calen Blackwood, the Alpha King. He was taller than the photos in the magazines. He wore a charcoal grey bespoke suit that probably cost more than the resort she worked at. He didn't wear a tie. The top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his throat. His hair was black, swept back, and his eyes, they were the same storm cloud grey as the baby's. He didn't speak. He walked into the room with the quiet lethality of a panther. He stopped 2 feet from her. The smell of him ozone pine and expensive scotch filled her senses, making her wolf whimper in submission. "Stand up," he said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. Sarah stood her legs shaking. She kept her eyes on his polished shoes. "Your Majesty." "Look at me." She forced her head up. His face was a mask of controlled rage. He was handsome, devastatingly so, but it was the beauty of a storm before it destroys a city. "You are Seraphina Vance," he said, holding a file. "No pack affiliation. Parents deceased. Employed as sanitation staff at Silver Pines. Level 1 Omega." "Yes, sir." "You are accused of kidnapping my nephew Tobias Blackwood and attempting to traffic him across the border." "No." Sarah gasped, forgetting her place. "No. I found him. He was in the snow. He was dying." Kaelin stepped closer, invading her personal space. He grabbed her left hand, yanking it up between them. He stared at the mark on her wrist. The golden wolf crest was still glowing faintly. Kaelin traced the lines of the mark with his thumb. His touch was electric, sending sparks up her arm. He looked repulsed yet fascinated. "This," he snarled softly, "is impossible. This mark is an ancient fail-safe. It is the Custos Matris, the Mother's Guard. It binds the heir to a protector in the absence of the biological mother." He looked her dead in the eye. "My sister-in-law died in childbirth 3 months ago. This mark should have gone to me, or my head of security, or the child's wet nurse, not—" He looked her up and down with disdain. "A stray." "I didn't ask for it," Sarah whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He grabbed me. It hurt." "The doctors say the baby is in critical condition," Kaelin said, dropping her hand as if it burned him. "He is suffering from severe hypothermia, but there is a complication." He turned his back on her, pacing the small cell. "He will not settle. He has been screaming for 2 hours. His heart rate is spiking. The doctors cannot stabilize him because he is fighting every nurse, every doctor. He is rejecting everyone." Kaelin stopped and turned back to her. The look in his eyes was one of pure desperation masked by hatred. "The bond," he spat the word out. "The magic in that mark has convinced the child that you are his source of safety. If he dies from stress, Seraphina, I will peel the skin from your body, myself." Suddenly the door opened again. A frantic woman in a nurse's uniform burst in. "Alpha Kaelin, his heart rate is 180. He's seizing. The doctor says we're losing him." Kaelin's face went pale. He looked at the nurse, then at Sarah. He moved in a blur. Before Sarah could blink, he had grabbed her by the upper arm, his grip bruising. "Move!" he commanded, dragging her out of the cell. They sprinted through the corridors of the estate. It was a blur of marble floors and terrified staff members, flattening themselves against the walls. Kaelin didn't let go of her. They burst into the medical wing. The sound of the baby's screaming was deafening. It was a raw, terrified sound that tore at Sarah's heart. In the center of the room, surrounded by beeping machines, was the tiny baby Tobias. He was thrashing in an incubator, his skin mottled and pale. "Let me go to him," Sarah said, the instinct overtaking her fear of the king. Kaelin shoved her toward the incubator. "Fix this." Sarah reached into the incubator. "Shh, Tobias. I'm here." She laid her hand on his chest. The effect was instant. The baby gasped, his back arching, and then he slumped into her touch. The screaming cut off abruptly. The golden mark on Sarah's wrist flared up, casting a warm, honey-colored light over the baby. The machines that were beeping frantically began to slow down. Beep, beep, beep. The doctor, a frantic-looking man with glasses, stared at the monitor. His vitals, they're stabilizing. His temperature is rising. It's the biofeedback from the mark. She's acting as a living heat source and adrenaline regulator. Sarah stroked the baby's cheek. I've got at you. You're safe. The room was silent. Sarah looked up to find Kaelin staring at her. The hatred was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating assessment. He cannot survive without the bond right now. The doctor whispered to Kaelin, if you separate them, the shock will kill him. Kaelin nodded slowly. He walked over to Sarah. He loomed over her, his shadow falling across her and the baby. It seems, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, that I am being held hostage by my own nephew. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. You will stay here, Serafina. You will nurse him, hold him, and keep him alive. But do not mistake this for hospitality. You are not a guest. You are a medical instrument. He straightened up and addressed his head of security, a scarred man standing by the door. Lock down the east wing. She stays in the nursery. If she tries to leave the room without my direct order, shoot her in the leg. Kaelin looked at Sarah one last time. Welcome to the family Omega. For 3 days, Serafina didn't sleep. She existed in a twilight state between exhaustion and hyper-vigilance, sitting in a velvet armchair next to Tobias's crib. The nursery in the Blackwood estate was larger than her entire apartment. It was filled with toys that had never been touched and painted a soft, calming blue. But to Sarah, it was a prison cell with silk curtains. She was fed, but the trays were slid onto the table by silent staff members who looked at her with a mixture of disgust and fear. To them, she was the kidnapper who had bewitched the air. The mark on her wrist had faded to a dull gold tattoo, but every time Tobias whimpered, it pulsed, sending a jolt of caffeine-like energy through her veins. It was the only thing keeping her awake. On the 4th morning, the heavy oak doors swung open. It wasn't Kaelin. A woman walked in. She was stunning with cascading blonde hair and eyes like polished emeralds. She wore a white dress that looked deceptively simple but was tailored to perfection. This was Lady Genevieve, the daughter of the Southern Alpha, and as the tabloids constantly speculated, the woman destined to be Kaelin's queen. She didn't look at Sarah. She walked straight to the crib, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. So, Genevieve said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, this is the little survivor. Sarah stood up instantly, placing her body between the woman and the crib. He's sleeping. Please keep your voice down. Genevieve stopped. She looked at Sarah for the first time, her eyes raking over Sarah's cheap grey uniform, the one the maids had given her. Move aside, Omega, Genevieve commanded. I am here to see my future nephew, Kaelin and I. We are family. You are help. Temporary help. The king gave orders, Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. No one touches him but me. His stress levels. I don't care about stress levels, Genevieve scoffed. She stepped forward, her hand glowing with a faint alpha aura. She used her strength to shove Sarah aside. It wasn't a hard shove, but Sarah was weak. She stumbled back into the armchair. Genevieve reached into the crib. Come here, little Tobias. Let's get you away from this filth. The moment Genevieve's manicured fingers brushed the baby's arm, the reaction was violent. Tobias didn't just cry. He shrieked. It was a sound of pure terror. And Sarah's wrist exploded. "No!" Sarah screamed, without thinking, purely on instinct driven by the mark. Sarah lunged. She wasn't fighting as an Omega. She was fighting as the Custos Matris. She grabbed Genevieve's wrist and twisted. "Let go of him!" "You little rat!" Genevieve snarled. She raised her free hand and slapped Sarah across the face. The sound echoed through the room. The force of the blow knocked Sarah to the floor, her lip split and bleeding. But Sarah didn't stay down. The golden light from her mark flared blindingly bright. A low, guttural growl ripped from Sarah's throat, a sound far too big for her small frame. She scrambled up, ready to tear the high-born lady apart. "Enough!" The thunderous voice froze them both. Kalen stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscular forearms corded with tension. His eyes were glowing a deep, dangerous crimson. "Kalen!" Genevieve cried immediately, clutching her wrist and putting on a face of victimhood. "Thank goodness this savage attacked me. I just wanted to check on the baby, and she threw herself at me." Kalen walked into the room. The air pressure seemed to drop. He looked at Genevieve, then at Tobias, who was still screaming. Finally, he looked at Sarah. Sarah was panting blood trickling down her chin. She stood protectively in front of the crib, her eyes wild, defying the Alpha King himself. "Is this true?" Kalen asked, his voice deadly calm. "She tried to take him," Sarah gasped out. "He was hurting. I felt it." Kalen walked past Genevieve. He stopped in front of Sarah. He reached out a hand. Sarah flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, Kalen reached past her and placed his hand on the crib railing. He looked down at his nephew. "Genevieve," Kalen said without turning around. "Leave." "Excuse me." Genevieve blinked, stunned. "Kalen, she assaulted a noble. She needs to be in the dungeons. Tobias was sleeping," Kalen said, his voice dropping an octave. "I was watching the security feed. You woke him. You touched him. And when my heir cried out in distress, you slapped his protector." He turned slowly to face her. His expression was terrifying. "If you ever touch the Custos Matris again, Genevieve, I will forget our father's alliance. Get out." Genevieve went pale. She gathered her skirts and fled the room, slamming the door behind her. Silence returned to the nursery, broken only by Tobias's whimpers. Kalen looked at Sarah. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He handed it to her. "Wipe your face," he said, his tone unreadable. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Kalen snapped, the softness vanishing. "I didn't do it for you. If you are injured, your stress hormones transfer to the baby through the bond. I am protecting him, not you." He walked to the window, looking out at the snowy grounds. "However," he said quietly, "you fought a high-born alpha to protect a child that isn't yours. That is not the behavior of a kidnapper." Sarah lowered the handkerchief. "I told you. I didn't take him." Kalen didn't answer. He just stared out at the snow, the weight of the crown looking heavy on his shoulders. "We'll see. The investigation is ongoing. Until then, stay alert. Genevieve is petty, and she has powerful friends. You just made an enemy." Nightfall brought a heavy silence to the estate. A blizzard was raging outside again, burying the world in white, mirroring the night Sarah had found Tobias. It was 3:00 a.m. Sarah was dozing in the chair, her hand resting on the baby's back through the bars of the crib. She was dreaming of the snow. In her dream, she was back in the forest, but the baby wasn't in a basket. He was buried deep in the ice. And he wasn't crying. He was silent. Sarah woke up with a gasp. Her heart was pounding. The mark on her wrist was itching, not burning, but a low, irritating hum. A warning. She sat up and looked around. The nursery was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of the baby monitor and the night light. Everything seemed normal. But the smell... Sarah sniffed the air. Beneath the scent of baby powder and lavender, there was something else. Something sweet. Sickly sweet. Like rotting almonds. Bitter almond. Cyanide. No wolf's bane gas. She looked at the ventilation vent above the crib. A faint, colorless mist was trickling out of it, drifting down directly toward Tobias. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. If Tobias breathed that in, for even a minute, his undeveloped wolf would die, and his human body would follow. "No," she whispered. She didn't waste time screaming. She grabbed the blanket from the bed and threw it over the crib, trying to create a seal. Then she scooped Tobias up, wrapping him tight against her chest, covering his face with her own shirt to filter the air. She ran for the door. Locked. Of course, Kaelin had locked her in for the night. "Help!" she screamed, banging on the heavy wood with her free hand. "Open the door." "Gas. There's gas." She coughed. The sweet smell was filling the room fast. Her limbs felt heavy. The gas was a neurotoxin designed to paralyze wolves before killing them. Her knees buckled. "I can't pass out," she told herself. "If I fall, he dies." She dragged herself away from the vent, huddling in the farthest corner of the room, curling her body around the baby like a shield. Tobias began to cry, the sound muffled against her chest. "Please," she prayed to the moon goddess. "Someone." The electronic lock on the door beeped red. It wasn't opening. The fail-safes had been overridden. Someone had hacked the system to keep them inside. Sarah's vision blurred. She felt the paralysis creeping up her legs. She couldn't stand anymore. She slid down the wall. "Break the window," her wolf screamed. But the windows were bulletproof glass. She was too weak. Then a thought hit her. The mark. It was a bond of distress. If she couldn't scream with her voice, she had to scream with her soul. Sarah closed her eyes. She focused on the burning brand on her wrist. She poured all her fear, all her desperation, and all the pain of the dying baby into the bond. She didn't push it to Tobias. She pushed it outwards, searching for the source of the mark's power. Kaelin. She screamed his name in her mind, Kaelin. 3 floors up in the Alpha's study, Kaelin Blackwood dropped his glass of whiskey. It shattered on the floor. He doubled over, clutching his chest, gasping for air. A searing pain ripped through his heart, accompanied by the taste of bitter almonds in his mouth and a terrifying sense of suffocation. It wasn't his pain. "Tobias!" he roared. He didn't take the stairs. He shifted. With a sound of cracking bones and tearing fabric, a massive midnight wolf, easily the size of a horse, stood in the office. He smashed through the office door, splinters flying, and bounded down the hallway. He reached the nursery door in seconds. He could smell the gas seeping through the cracks. Wolf's bane. Concentrated. He didn't bother with the keypad. He backed up and rammed the door with his shoulder. Boom! The wood groaned. Boom! The hinges snap-beat. The heavy door fell inward with a crash. Kalen, now back in human form, naked from the waist up, held his breath. He rushed into the toxic fog. He found them in the corner. Sarah was unconscious, slumped against the wall. But even in her unconscious state, her arms were locked rigid around the bundle in her lap. Her face was buried in the baby's blanket, filtering the air for him. Kalen grabbed them both. He lifted Sarah, who was still clutching Tobias, into his arms as easily as if she were a doll. He sprinted out of the room, down the hall, and kicked open the doors to the balcony. The freezing winter air hit them. Kalen fell to his knees on the snowy balcony, laying Sarah down. He pried her arms apart to check the baby. Tobias was coughing, his face red, but he was breathing. He was alive. Kalen turned to Sarah. She wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. "No, no, no," Kalen growled. "You don't get to die on me. Not after this." He placed his hands on her chest and began CPR. "Breathe, damn it. Breathe." He pumped her chest. Once. Twice. "Come on, Serafina." He leaned down and breathed air into her mouth. He tasted the poison on her lips. On the third round, she gasped. Her body convulsed, and she coughed violently, rolling onto her side to retch on the snow. Kalen slumped back, sitting on his heels, his chest heaving. He looked at the shivering, coughing Omega in the snow, and then at the crying baby. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The security system hadn't been breached from the outside. The gas had been piped in through the internal ventilation. The door had been locked from the main server. "It wasn't you," Kalen whispered, looking at Sarah. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes glassy and terrified. Is he okay?" "He's alive," Kalen said, his voice trembling with a rage that shook the balcony floor. "Because of you." He stood up, his face hardening into a mask of pure violence. He reached down and pulled Sarah to her feet, wrapping his own suit jacket, which a guard had just run up to hand him around her shoulders. "Jax," Kalen roared to his head of security, who was running down the hall. "Alpha, seal the estate," Kalen commanded. "No one leaves. No one enters. Cut the phone lines. Kill the internet." He looked back at the nursery, where the poison gas was still dissipating. "The assassin is in this house," Kalen said, his eyes glowing so bright they looked like molten gold. "And before the sun rises, I'm going to paint the walls with their blood." The Blackwood estate was no longer a home. It was a fortress under siege from within. Kalen had moved Serafina and Tobias to his personal quarters on the top floor, the only area of the castle with a completely independent ventilation system and biometric locks that only responded to his DNA. Sarah sat on the edge of the king's massive four-poster bed. The room smelled of him, mahogany rain and power. Tobias was finally asleep in a portable bassinet Kalen had carried up himself. "Drink this," Kalen said, handing her a glass of water. His hands were shaking slightly. It was the first time she had seen the Alpha King look truly rattled. "I'm fine," Sarah said, though her throat still burned from the residual gas. "You died," Kalen said flatly. "For a full minute, Serafina, your heart stopped. Do not tell me you are fine." He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. I checked the logs. The ventilation override commanded the system to pump concentrated wolfsbane into the nursery. The command came from the security terminal in the West Wing guest suites. Sarah's eyes widened. "The guest suites, that's where the visiting nobles are staying," Kalen finished grimly, "including Lady Genevieve and her father, Duke Sterling." He stopped pacing and looked at her. The intensity in his grey eyes made her breath hitch. "I am going to assemble everyone in the Grand Hall," he said. "Every staff member, every guard, every noble. No one is exempt." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, fear creeping into her voice. "Torture them." "If I have to," Kalen said without hesitation. "But I have a better way, a more accurate way." He walked over to the bassinet and looked down at the sleeping baby. "The bond," Kalen said softly. "The Kustos Matris bond doesn't just connect you to Tobias physically. It connects your instincts. You felt his pain before the gas even hit him. You felt his fear when Genevieve touched him." He turned to Sarah. "You are going to walk down that line of suspects with Tobias in your arms, and you are going to tell me who makes the baby scream." The grand hall was silent as a tomb. 50 people stood in a line. Maids in black and white uniforms, guards in tactical gear, and a handful of nobles in silk pajamas and robes looking indignant and sleepy. Lady Genevieve stood near the front, flanked by her father, Duke Sterling, a man with a thick grey beard and eyes like cold flint. "This is an outrage, Kalen." Duke Sterling boomed his voice, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Dragging us out of bed at 400 a.m. like common criminals. We are your guests. We are your allies." "An assassin is in this room," Kalen said. He stood on the dais, his voice amplified by his Alpha command making the windows rattle. "My nephew was poisoned tonight. The woman who saved him, my guest, was nearly killed." "The maid!" Genevieve scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're doing this for a servant." "Bring her in," Kalen commanded. The double doors opened. Serafina walked in. She had showered and changed into clothes. Kalen had provided a black cashmere sweater and leggings that fit her surprisingly well. In her arms, wrapped in the royal blue blanket, was Tobias. She felt small. Every eye in the room was on her. Some looked pitiful, some looked angry, but she focused on the warmth of the baby against her chest. "Walk the line, Serafina," Kalen said gently. "Don't be afraid. If anyone moves a muscle toward you, they die." Sarah took a deep breath. She stepped off the dais. She walked past the kitchen staff. Tobias slept soundly. She walked past the gardening crew. Nothing. She reached the guards. Jax, the head of security, nodded at her respectfully. Tobias remained calm. Then she reached the nobles. She stepped in front of Duke Sterling. The older man sneered at her, his lip curling in disgust. "Pathetic," he muttered. "A mongrel holding a prince." Sarah felt a spike of coldness in her chest, the baby's reaction to the man's hostility. But Tobias didn't cry. He just shifted uncomfortably. The Duke was a bigot, but he wasn't the killer. Sarah moved to Genevieve. Genevieve refused to look at her. She stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. She smelled of expensive perfume and something else. Underneath the floral scent, there was a chemical tang. Sarah's heart rate picked up. Tobias stirred. He let out a small whimper. "Is it her?" Kalen asked from the dais. His voice was like a whip crack. Sarah hesitated. The reaction wasn't violent like before. It was uneasy but not terrified. I'm not sure," Sarah whispered. "He doesn't like her. But it's not the screaming terror." "She's nervous," Genevieve spat. "Of course the baby senses that I'm being accused of treason." Sarah took one more step. Next to Genevieve stood a man Sarah hadn't noticed before. He was young, perhaps early 20s, wearing the livery of the Sterling house servants. He was a valet. He was thin, with pale skin and watery blue eyes. He was trembling. As Sarah stepped into his personal space, Tobias's eyes snapped open. The baby went rigid. A low, keening wail started in his throat. Sarah felt it instantly, a wave of nausea so strong she almost dropped the child. It was the same sickness she had felt in the nursery right before the gas hit. The smell of bitter almonds seemed to ghost through the air around this man. "Him?" Sarah gasped, stumbling back. "It's him." The valet's eyes went wide. "No!" he shrieked. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He ran. He bolted from the line, shoving Genevieve into Sarah. He was fast as suppressed wolf speed. He sprinted toward the side exit. "Take him!" Kalen roared. Jax moved, but the valet was desperate. He pulled a ceramic knife from his boot, a blade that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, and slashed at the nearest guard, cutting his throat. Chaos erupted. Nobles screamed and ducked. The valet reached the door, but before he could touch the handle, a shadow engulfed him. Kalen had moved. He had vaulted from the dais, clearing 20 feet in a single leap. He landed on the valet's back, slamming him into the stone floor with bone-shattering force. "Got you," Kalen growled. He flipped the man over, pinning him by the throat. "Who sent you? Who gave you the codes?" The valet was gasping, blood bubbling from his lips. He looked past Kalen, his eyes locking on someone in the crowd. "For the purity," the valet choked out. Then his jaw clenched. A sickening crunch echoed as he bit down on a false molar. "No!" Kalen shouted. He tried to pry the man's jaw open, but it was too late. The valet convulsed once his eyes rolling back in his head. Foam gathered at his mouth. Cyanide. The hall fell into stunned silence again. The assassin was dead. Kalen stood up slowly. He looked at the corpse. Then he looked up at the line of nobles. His gaze lingered on Duke Sterling and Genevieve, but they both looked genuinely horrified. "Clear the room," Kalen ordered, his voice hollow. "Lockdown remains in effect. No one leaves this estate until I find out who this man was working for." Sarah clutched Tobias tight. The baby was crying softly now. The assassin was dead, but the fear didn't leave. Because before the valet died, he hadn't looked at Kalen. He had looked past him. He was looking for approval from someone else standing in that line. The following morning, the atmosphere in the estate was suffocating. The snowstorm outside had finally broken, leaving the world buried in 5 feet of pristine white. But inside, the mood was dark. Kalen was in the command center with Jax. Sarah was back in the Alpha's quarters pacing. She couldn't shake the feeling of the valet's eyes. Who was he looking at? She placed Tobias in his crib and sat at Kalen's desk. It was cluttered with maps, treaties, and personnel files. She wasn't snooping exactly, but her eyes wandered to a stack of files labeled Sterling House Entourage. She opened the file. It contained the background checks for everyone Duke Sterling had brought with him. She found the valet's picture. Name, Elias Thorne. Position, junior valet. No criminal record. Clean background. Sarah frowned. She flipped the page. There was a section for known associates. It was empty. She kept flipping through the other files. The Duke's file. Genevieve's file. The personal chef. The driver. Then she stopped. She pulled out a file for a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne. The last name caught her eye. Thorne. Like the valet. She read the profile. Dr. Aris Thorne, Chief Medical Officer for the Sterling Pack. specialist in genetic anomalies and wolf biology. Sarah looked at the photo. The woman was older, severe-looking with glasses. She wasn't in the line last night. Where was she? Sarah grabbed the room phone and dialed the command center. This is Jax. Jax, it's Sarah. Where is Dr. Thorne? Who? Dr. Eris Thorne. She's part of the Sterling entourage. Was she in the lineup last night? Jax paused. There was the sound of typing. No. The medical staff were exempted because they were attending to the Duke's wife, who is bedridden in the guest wing. Why, the valet who died. Sarah said, her voice rising. His name was Elias Thorne. Is there a relation? Hold on, Jax said. The typing became frantic. Damn it. Personnel files didn't flag it, because they're from different packs technically, but birth records match. That's his mother. Jax, Sarah said, a cold chill running down her spine. The valet wasn't the mastermind. He was just the hands. His mother is the specialist. She knows biology. She would know how to use wolfsbane gas without killing humans. I'm sending a squad to the guest wing now, Jax said. Stay put. The line went dead. Sarah stood up. She should stay put. That was the smart thing to do. But then she heard it. A soft click from the balcony door. The balcony of the Alpha's quarters was 4 stories up. It was impossible to climb, unless you were a shifter with specialized gear. Sarah spun around. Standing on the balcony, framed by the sunlight reflecting off the snow, was a woman. She wore a white lab coat over tactical climbing gear. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, and she was holding a gun, a tranquilizer pistol. Clever girl, Dr. Thorne said, her voice calm and clinical. She stepped into the room, closing the glass door behind her. I underestimated the Omega intellect. I thought you were just a broodmare for the bond. Get away from him, Sarah snarled, backing toward the crib. She felt the mark on her wrist heat up not with pain, but with power. Her wolf was surfacing, fueled by the Alpha King's magic. I don't want to hurt the child, Dr. Thorne said, adjusting her glasses. I just need a sample. A blood sample, a tissue sample. Do you have any idea what he is? A child born with the Alpha King's mark on someone else? He is a genetic singularity. He could be the key to curing the degenerative gene in the Sterling bloodline. You killed your own son, Sarah accused, stalling for time. She needed Kalen. She pushed the distress signal through the bond with everything she had. Dr. Thorne's face twitched. A flash of pain quickly suppressed. Elias knew the risks. He died for the greater good of our pack. The Sterling line is dying out, Seraphina. We are becoming weak. This baby, his DNA is pure power. I just need him for a few hours. You're insane, Sarah spat. I'm a scientist, Thorne corrected. She raised the pistol. Step away from the crib. I don't want to shoot you, but I will. No. Sarah planted her feet. She grabbed a heavy brass statue from the desk, a sculpture of a wolf. Have it your way. Thorne pulled the trigger. Thwip. The dart flew through the air. Sarah didn't dodge. She couldn't dodge without exposing the crib. She raised her left arm, the arm with the mark. The dart hit her forearm, but it didn't pierce the skin. As the needle touched the golden brand, a shock wave of energy erupted from Sarah. It was like a physical wall of gold light. The dart disintegrated into ash. Dr. Thorne gasped, stepping back. Fascinating. The mark. It provides an active shield. Sarah didn't know how she did it. She just knew she was angry. so incredibly angry. "Get out!" Sarah screamed. The shout was amplified. It wasn't just her voice. It sounded like Kaelin's Alpha command. The force of the shout hit Dr. Thorne like a physical punch. She was thrown backward, crashing through the glass door and onto the snowy balcony. Before Thorne could recover, the bedroom door exploded inward. Kaelin was there. He didn't look human. His eyes were entirely black. His canines were fully extended. He saw Sarah standing guard over the crib, glowing with golden light. He saw the shattered glass. He saw Dr. Thorne trying to scramble over the balcony railing to escape. Kaelin crossed the room in a blur. He grabbed Dr. Thorne by the back of her lab coat and hauled her back inside, throwing her across the room. She slammed into the wall and crumpled to the floor. Kaelin loomed over her, his claws extending. He was ready to tear her apart. "Kaelin, wait!" Sarah shouted. Kaelin froze his claws inches from Thorne's throat. He turned his head to look at Sarah. He was breathing heavily, fighting his wolf. "She knows why," Sarah said, her voice shaking as the adrenaline faded. "She said something about the Sterling bloodline dying, about a cure. She's not just an assassin. She's a researcher." Kaelin looked back at the terrified doctor. "Is that true?" he snarled. "You murdered my staff, poisoned my air, and sent your own son to die. For a science experiment, we are dying." Thorne cried out, blood running down her face. "The Sterling wolves are becoming sterile. We lose our shifts by age 30. The king's blood is the only cure I had to try." Kaelin straightened up. The murderous rage was replaced by cold, judicial ice. "Jax," Kaelin called out. Jax and 4 guards rushed in, weapons raised. "Take her," Kaelin said, wiping his hands as if they were dirty. "To the deep cells. I want to know every single person involved in this research. If Duke Sterling knew, I will burn his house to the ground." The guards dragged the screaming doctor away. Kaelin turned to Sarah. The golden light on her skin was fading. She dropped the brass statue, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. Kaelin walked over to her. He didn't speak. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her into his chest. It was the first time he had held her, not out of necessity, but out of comfort. Sarah buried her face in his shirt, smelling the scent of pine and rain. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly safe. "You defended him," Kaelin murmured into her hair. "You used the command. I heard you." "I didn't mean to," Sarah mumbled. "You are not just a protector, Seraphina," Kaelin said, pulling back to look at her. His hand cups her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "The mark is changing you. It's making you a queen." Sarah looked up at him, her heart pounding. The air between them was electric. The danger was over, but a new kind of tension was filling the room. Kaelin leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. "And," he whispered, "I think I am starting to like it." 3 months had passed since the night of the assassin. The winter had finally broken, giving way to a tentative spring. The Blackwood estate was no longer a fortress under siege. It was a palace in preparation. Duke Sterling had been stripped of his titles, his lands seized by the crown, and his daughter Genevieve was exiled to the outer territories. The sickness in their bloodline was being treated by royal doctors, but their political power was dead. For Seraphina, however, the thaw brought a different kind of coldness. Fear. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in her quarters. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver thread, that looked like constellations. It was beautiful. It was regal. and it felt like a costume. Tonight was the Equinox Ball. It was the night Kaelin would officially present Tobias as the crown prince to the entire Wolf Council. It was also, Sarah believed, the night she would be dismissed. Tobias was healthy now. He was 6 months old, chubby, laughing and strong. He didn't scream when nurses held him anymore. The bond on her wrist had stopped burning weeks ago. It was just a faint golden scar now. Her job as the custos matris, the emergency mother, was done. "I should pack," Sarah whispered to her reflection, "before they ask me to leave." There was a knock on the door. "Enter," she said, smoothing her dress. Kaelin walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing his formal military dress uniform, black with gold aiguillettes and the royal crest pinned to his chest. But his eyes weren't on his medals. They were on her. "You look—" Kaelin started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "You look breathtaking, Seraphina." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I wanted to look presentable for my last night." Kaelin frowned, his thick brows knitting together. He walked into the room, closing the distance between them. "Your last night? What are you talking about? Tobias is safe," Sarah said, looking down at her hands. "The investigation is over. The bond has faded. You don't need a former maid hanging around the palace confusing the guests. I've already written my resignation letter." She reached for an envelope on the vanity, but Kaelin snatched her hand before she could touch it. His grip was warm, firm, and possessive. "Look at your wrist," he commanded. Sarah looked. "It's fading, Kaelin. The gold is almost gone." "Look closer," he whispered. He ran his thumb over the faint golden lines. As he did, a strange sensation washed over her. Not the burning pain of the custos matris, but a warm, rhythmic thrumming, like a second heartbeat. Beneath the fading golden wolf of the guardian mark, a new color was blooming, a deep, vibrant violet. Sarah gasped. What is that? The custos matris is a temporary bond." Kaelin explained, his eyes intense. "It fades when the child is safe. But this violet mark. This is not magic, Seraphina. This is biology." He stepped closer, his chest brushing against hers. "It's a soul brand," he said softly. "It means your wolf didn't just bond with the baby. She bonded with the pack. She bonded with the Alpha." Sarah's heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs. "But I'm an Omega. I'm nobody. I was found in the trash, Kaelin." "You were found in the snow," Kaelin corrected fiercely. "You walked through a blizzard to save a child who wasn't yours. You took a bullet of poison for him. You faced down an assassin with nothing but a statue and your rage." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the violet mark on her wrist. "A queen is not defined by her bloodline, Seraphina. She is defined by what she is willing to sacrifice. You are the only person in this kingdom I trust with my heir. And you are the only woman." He paused, his grey eyes softening into a look of raw vulnerability, "that I have ever wanted to stand beside me." "Kaelin." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Don't resign," he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. "Reign with me." The ballroom was packed. Hundreds of alphas, betas, and dignitaries from across the continent hushed as the heavy doors opened. They were expecting the king to walk in alone, perhaps carrying the baby. Instead, Kaelin Blackwood walked in with Seraphina on his arm. She walked with her head high, the midnight blue dress flowing around her like water. In her arms, she held Prince Tobias, who cooed happily at the crowd. Murmurs rippled through the room. Is that the maid? Look at her wrist. Is that purple? Kaelin led her to the throne dais. He didn't sit. He turned to the crowd. My people. Kaelin's voice boomed, silencing the room. You came here to see the future of House Blackwood. You came to see your prince. He gestured to Tobias in Sarah's arms. But a prince needs more than a king. Kaelin continued. He needs a mother, and a kingdom needs a heart. Kaelin turned to Sarah. He reached out and took a small velvet box from his pocket. He didn't open a ring box. He opened a case containing a delicate diamond-encrusted tiara, the lunar crown. He placed it gently on Seraphina's head. I present to you, Kaelin announced, his voice ringing with pride, Seraphina Vance, my mate, your queen. For a second there was silence. Then Tobias let out a happy, loud laugh, clapping his tiny hands. It broke the spell. The room erupted, not in polite applause, but in howls, the traditional wolf salute of acceptance. Sarah looked out at the sea of people bowing to her, the girl who used to haul their trash. She looked down at the baby, who had started it all, and then up at the man who looked at her as if she were the only star in the sky. She wasn't cold anymore. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in her life, the Alpha King's mark on her wrist didn't feel like a burden. It felt like home. And that is the incredible story of Seraphina and the Alpha King. From a freezing night in the snow to the throne of the most powerful pack in the world, she proved that true nobility isn't about where you are born. It's about the courage within your heart. The mark on her wrist. What do you think? Did Seraphina make the right choice forgiving Kaelin for how he treated her in the beginning? Or should she have made him work harder for her love? And what would you do if you found a royal baby in the snow? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.